At the height of America's greatest age of wealth, one family built a palace so massive, so expensive, it should never have survived. A house with more rooms than a hotel, more servants than a town, and a cost so extreme it shocked even the richest dynasty in America. When fortunes vanished, when empires collapsed, this mansion should have fallen with them, but it didn't. While other Gilded Age palaces were abandoned, auctioned, or destroyed, this one endured. Not by accident, not by luck, by a secret few ever understood. Tonight, we uncover how ambition created it, crisis nearly destroyed it, and one extraordinary decision saved it from becoming a forgotten ruin. This is the story of Biltmore and the hidden battle to keep a dream alive. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more deep dive documentaries like this to life stories buried in history, rebuilt piece by piece, and told with the detail they deserve. And if you want more long-form investigations into the hidden truths behind America's greatest landmarks, this is your channel. The Biltmore estate, completed in 1895, should not exist today. It should have met the same fate as the Vanderbilt mansions of Fifth Avenue, the Newport cottages, and the great palaces built along America's early industrial corridors. It was too big, too expensive, too remote, and too tied to a world that disappeared long before the 20th century matured. And yet, Biltmore stands. America's largest private home, 250 rooms, 65 fireplaces, 3 kitchens, an indoor pool, a private gym, sprawling gardens, and an engineered landscape of thousands of acres, did not merely survive. It evolved, it adapted, it transformed itself again and again, defying every historical pattern of collapse. To understand how this improbable survival happened, we must return to the man whose vision built it and the woman whose determination saved it. Biltmore's endurance is not an accident. It is the product of deliberate reinvention, economic flexibility, and an unwavering commitment to a single belief that beauty, culture, and land stewardship could outlast the rise and fall of fortunes. George Washington Vanderbilt II was not the typical titan of his dynasty. Born into one of America's wealthiest families, he grew up in libraries, not boardrooms. The books he read shaped his values more than any ledger or dividend report. When he traveled, he didn't simply observe European estates, he studied them, their architecture, their agricultural systems, their integration into the environment. Biltmore was never meant to be a display of dominance. It was a philosophy made physical, a belief that the American landscape could support a modern chateau, a model estate, a center for learning, forestry, art, and refinement. The house was his statement about what wealth should be used for education, preservation, and elevation of national culture. But this philosophy created a paradox. Biltmore's brilliance guaranteed its fragility. George built a palace in the wilderness, magnificent but expensive, modern but demanding, awe-inspiring but economically impractical. Most Gilded Age mansions failed because the cost of operation exceeded the capacity of any family to maintain them. Biltmore should have suffered the same fate, yet the difference between Biltmore and the estates that collapsed was not the size of the fortune behind it, it was the values shaping its stewardship. Because ultimately Biltmore's survival was never about marble, limestone, tapestries, forests, or fireplaces. It was about people, those who built it, those who cared for it, and above all, those who refused to let it die. The first phase of its survival story begins with understanding the magnitude of what George Vanderbilt created. At 250 rooms, Biltmore was not simply a residence. It was a logistical ecosystem. The house required continuous heat, electricity, maintenance, cleaning, and coordination among nearly 80 servants at peak operation. Its heating system alone, powered by an elaborate network of boilers, consumed resources at a rate few homes in America could match. Its gardens required dozens of gardeners. Its agricultural operations required professional management and innovative planning. No matter how carefully it was designed, Biltmore was a financial contradiction. A property intended to be self-sustaining, yet built at a scale that defied conventional financial sustainability. But to George, the value was never measured in dollars. It was measured in permanence. He believed Biltmore would endure because it represented excellence, and excellence, in his mind, was not negotiable, not temporary, and not vulnerable to the fluctuations of markets. However, history soon proved that even the grandest visions cannot escape reality. When George died unexpectedly in 1914 at the age of 51, Biltmore entered its most precarious period. The estate was no longer simply a dream, it was a responsibility. A massive, expensive, aging responsibility. This is where most Gilded Age estates collapsed. A single generation builds, the next inherits, the next sells or demolishes. Biltmore survived this transition only because of one woman, Edith Stuyvesant Dresser Vanderbilt. Edith did not simply preserve Biltmore, she redefined it. She learned the estate's finances with precision. She reorganized operations. She implemented efficiencies George had never considered. She managed the agricultural zones, timber production, livestock, crops, and staffing with the discipline of a trained economist rather than a society hostess. Her leadership extended beyond survival. It transformed Biltmore into the earliest example of a diversified estate economy in America. This approach became Biltmore's first survival secret, adapting the economic model without compromising the cultural vision. When World War I began, Edith integrated Biltmore into the national war effort. When the 1922 brought new taxes, shifting cultural values, and the decline of aristocratic America, she recalibrated the estate's operations again. And when the Great Depression hit, threatening every remaining great house in the country, she made the most radical decision of all. She opened Biltmore to the public. What began as scandalous charging admission to a Vanderbilt home became the single most innovative decision in the estate's history. It transformed Biltmore from a private residence into a cultural institution, generating revenue and creating a new identity rooted in education, preservation, and tourism. This decision laid the foundation for the Biltmore we know today. But this was only the first chapter in a much longer story of transformation. Biltmore survived one great crisis after another because each generation confronted an unspoken but essential truth. The estate could not survive by remaining what it had been. It could survive only by becoming what the times required. The groundwork was laid for a century of reinvention, and to understand how Biltmore became not just a preserved relic of the Gilded Age, but a thriving modern enterprise, we must follow its evolution through war, economic collapse, cultural changes, tax revolutions, and a complete reinvention of what it means to operate a historic estate in the United States. This is the story of how a house became an institution, how a private estate became a national landmark, how a Gilded Age dream refused to collapse, and how Biltmore discovered the secret that allowed it to outlive an entire era. To understand why Biltmore survived when nearly every other Gilded Age estate vanished, you must understand the hidden machinery operating beneath its marble floors and behind its carved oak doors. Biltmore was not simply a house, it was a functioning ecosystem powered by human labor. At its operational peak, approximately 80 servants kept the estate running. Cooks, butlers, maids, laundresses, gardeners, grooms, electricians, engineers, carpenters, footmen, and foresters. Their world was invisible by design. Separate corridors, concealed staircases, isolated workstations, and a rigid hierarchy allowed the estate to appear effortlessly perfect to its guests. This workforce represented another one of Biltmore's survival secrets: professionalization and structured labor management. Where other estates relied on inconsistent staffing or undertrained laborers, George and later Edith built a disciplined system where expertise, not status, guided operations. European-trained craftsmen were imported during construction. Domestic workers learned advanced techniques in housekeeping, food service, agricultural management, and forestry. Servants received stable wages, consistent housing, and access to structured roles that improved retention. These practices foreshadowed modern hospitality management decades before it formally existed. Still, the estate's cost remained overwhelming. No staff system, however efficient, could fully counterbalance the financial burden of heating, cleaning, and maintaining 250 rooms spread across nearly 180,000 square feet. And while Biltmore's agricultural operations were designed to make the estate self-sufficient, the reality was far more complicated. Forestry required decades to turn a profit. Farming income fluctuated with the market. Dairy production was steady, but modest compared to estate expenses. And entertaining guests, an essential part of the estate's cultural mission, required constant investment. This imbalance meant that Biltmore's long-term survival demanded more than efficiency. It required innovation. During the early 1900s, the estate became a hub for cultural, artistic, and scientific exchange. Writers, politicians, scientists, and artists visited not because of its luxury, but because George curated an intellectual community. He invited thinkers, conservationists, and scholars who shaped national conversations. Edith Wharton, Henry James, John Singer Sargent, diplomats, legislators, and members of the Roosevelt family walked through the halls, debated ideas in the library, and studied the estate's unique approach to forestry and agricultural modernization. These visits elevated Biltmore beyond the role of a private palace. It became an educational platform, another layer of its survival strategy. But even brilliance cannot defy mortality. George's unexpected death in 1914 exposed the vulnerability of Biltmore's financial model. The estate still held enormous cultural value, yet it consumed money at a pace impossible to sustain without constant oversight and income. Here's where Biltmore's survival secret shifts from vision to resilience. Edith Vanderbilt, widowed for the second time, assumed responsibility for an estate that should not have been survivable. She inherited not only George's architectural masterpiece, but also his debts, his forestry projects, his agricultural experiments, and his unfinished vision. Her response was not sentimental. It was strategic. She restructured the estate with the precision of a business executive. She analyzed ledgers, renegotiated supplier contracts, consolidated staff, and streamlined operations. She integrated new revenue models without compromising the estate's cultural value. The American world outside Biltmore was changing rapidly. Income tax reshaped the financial landscape for wealthy families. Social expectations shifted after World War I. The cultural appetite for aristocratic excess declined. And yet Edith continued refining the estate with the belief that Biltmore could not simply survive, it had to evolve. During World War I, Biltmore expanded its agricultural output to support national needs. Crops, dairy products, and timber flowed from the estate to wartime production networks. Servants enlisted, the social world contracted, and the grand house transitioned into a hybrid institution, part home, part working estate, part civic contributor. Cornelia Vanderbilt, the only child of George and Edith, grew up during this transition. Her childhood was shaped not by extravagance, but by responsibility. She was raised not as a sheltered heiress, but as someone expected to understand the world beyond the estate walls. This reflected Edith's long-term strategy. Biltmore's future depended on producing heirs capable of navigating the modern world, not simply inheriting wealth. But even with tactical management and wartime contributions, Biltmore's financial pressures continued to grow. By the late 1922, Edith faced decisions that would determine whether the estate lived or died. Taxes rose, operational costs increased, agricultural modernization slowed. Tourism was non-existent because the idea of opening a private home to the public was still unthinkable. Then the stock market crashed in 1929. What had once been an ambitious but manageable financial challenge now became a crisis. Many of America's great estates collapsed outright during this period. Fortune names that had once seemed eternal lost everything. The preservation of luxury properties became impossible. The era of massive private residences was ending. Edith realized something crucial. Biltmore's greatest threat was not its size, but its inflexibility. If it remained solely a residence, it would die. If it became solely a museum, it would stagnate. If it became solely a business, it would lose its identity. To save it, she had to redefine it. Her solution, announced in 1930, shocked the remnants of Gilded Age society. She opened Biltmore House to the public. This decision, radical, embarrassing to elitists, and entirely unprecedented, became the turning point that would ensure Biltmore's future. It democratized the estate, it generated sustainable revenue, and it changed the narrative of what a historic American home could be. Tourists came during the Depression not for entertainment but for wonder. For $1, they could stand in the banquet hall, walk through the Winter Garden, or see the library where George Vanderbilt had once studied 8 languages. These visitors did not gawk at excess. They marveled at craftsmanship, conservation, and possibility. Opening the estate created a new identity, Biltmore as an educational, cultural, and economic institution. But this was only the first phase of reinvention. Next came land management, asset restructuring, and national partnerships. In the years that followed, Edith sold tens of thousands of acres land that eventually helped form Pisgah National Forest. This decision preserved George's forestry legacy, while generating crucial revenue to sustain the house. By the time Edith died in 1958 at age 92, Biltmore had survived 2 world wars: the Great Depression, the decline of aristocratic America, shifting tax laws, and massive cultural change. But the story of survival did not end there. It entered its next chapter under the hands of George's grandson, William A. Cecil, a man who turned preservation into innovation. When Edith Vanderbilt died in 1958, she left behind something extraordinary, not a perfectly preserved relic of the Gilded Age, but a living estate that had survived catastrophes that obliterated nearly every other American mansion of its era. Yet survival was not the same as stability. Biltmore faced a new and equally dangerous threat: the modern world. The mid-20th century brought pressures unimaginable in George Vanderbilt's time. Property taxes climbed, maintenance costs soared, expectations for tourism changed. Families no longer traveled long distances simply to walk through historic homes. Competition increased. The American economy shifted toward mobility, amusement parks, emerging resorts, and commercial entertainment. A lesser estate might have been forced into government ownership, museum conversion, or liquidation. But Biltmore was entering its next phase, led by someone uniquely equipped to understand both the house's heritage and the realities of contemporary economics. That person was William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil, George Vanderbilt's grandson. Unlike his ancestors, William approached the estate not as a residence or a status symbol, but as a business asset, one that required strategic expansion and modernization to survive. He recognized what previous generations had only partially acknowledged. Biltmore could not rely on tourism alone. A single revenue source could never sustain an estate with massive square footage, historical preservation requirements, and operational demands comparable to those of a small town. William's philosophy created the estate's next survival secret: diversification as preservation. He expanded, but always in alignment with the estate's core identity: beauty, culture, agriculture, and stewardship. One of his earliest decisions was revolutionary: the creation of the Biltmore Winery. Many questioned the idea of a winery in North Carolina, but William believed that Biltmore's agricultural heritage and expansive acreage made it not only feasible, but ideal. The winery opened in 1985 and eventually became one of the most visited wineries in the United States. It was more than a revenue generator. It was a bridge between George Vanderbilt's agricultural ambitions and modern consumer expectations. Next came hospitality. In 2001, the Inn on Biltmore Estate opened a luxury hotel positioned not inside the historic house, but on the surrounding property. This preserved the integrity of Biltmore House while creating a significant new income stream. The inn allowed guests to immerse themselves in the landscape George Vanderbilt fell in love with in 1888. Later, additional lodging options and village-style retail areas expanded the estate's capacity to host visitors without overwhelming the historic house. With every decision, William maintained a critical balance, expanding Biltmore's operations without compromising its identity. This period also saw massive investments in preservation infrastructure. Modern climate control systems protected priceless artworks and historical furnishings. Fire suppression technologies were quietly integrated into the structure. Skilled conservators and engineers maintained everything from stonework to roofing to textiles. Unlike Gilded Age construction, which relied heavily on imported European artisans, modern preservation required interdisciplinary teams, chemists, engineers, historians, and conservators working collectively. The result was a preserved estate that remained functionally alive, not frozen in time. Yet the true genius of William Cecil's strategy was not simply diversification. It was the creation of an integrated estate economy, a system where each component supported the others. Tourism increased demand for dining. Dining increased demand for estate-grown products. Estate production strengthened the brand. The brand expanded public interest. Public interest increased tourism. This interconnected model is the foundation of Biltmore's stability in the 21st century. But even William Cecil's achievements were not the final chapter. Today, Biltmore remains family-owned, an astonishing rarity in American history. The descendants of George Vanderbilt continue to operate the estate, guided by a commitment that transcends business. A belief that Biltmore is not a property to be exploited, but a legacy to be sustained. This brings us to Biltmore's ultimate survival secret: adaptive continuity. Every generation altered the estate to meet the realities of its time, yet each maintained the essence of George Vanderbilt's original vision. None attempted to freeze Biltmore in its 1895 form. None abandoned its cultural purpose. None allowed sentimentality to interfere with practicality. Instead, they embraced an evolving interpretation of stewardship. Modern Biltmore operates as a historic house museum, a conservation site, a winery, a resort destination, a working farm, a research partner, a cultural center. This hybrid identity is precisely why it remains alive. Compare this with the fate of other Gilded Age estates. Fifth Avenue mansions were demolished, Newport properties were surrendered to preservation societies, palaces in Chicago, Cleveland, and Boston were razed or converted into institutional buildings. Fortunes that built them fractured under taxes, shrinking wealth, and changing cultural expectations. Biltmore alone endured because it refused to confine itself to any single definition. It is not just a house, not just a museum, not just a business, not just a symbol of the past. It is a living, evolving organism shaped by the needs of each era. This is why more than 1 million people visit each year. They don't come to witness a fossil of the Gilded Age. They come to witness a rare phenomenon, a historic estate that continues to breathe. They walk through the same winter garden where guests gathered in 1895. They stand in the banquet hall beneath a 70-foot ceiling engineered with disguised steel trusses. They explore the library that once held over 10,000 volumes. And outside, they see the forests George planted more than a century ago, now mature, thriving, and protected. These elements are not simply preserved relics. They are active parts of a system that continues to fulfill George Vanderbilt's foundational purpose: to create beauty, knowledge, and sustainability on a monumental scale. And so Biltmore remains the only Gilded Age mansion of its kind, still owned by the family who built it, still operating as a vast estate, still welcoming the public, still expanding, still learning, still adapting. More than a testament to wealth, Biltmore is a testament to resilience, to vision, to persistence. A reminder that empires collapse when they refuse to change, but they survive when they do. George Vanderbilt built Biltmore to last. Edith Vanderbilt saved it when it should have fallen. William Cecil reinvented it for the modern world. And the current generation continues the work of safeguarding a legacy that is now larger than any one family. The survival secret of Biltmore is simple, but profound: a willingness to evolve without ever abandoning the core purpose of its creation. America's greatest mansion still stands alive, relevant, and enduring, because every generation understood that preservation is not freezing time. Preservation is adaptation. And adaptation is the reason a Gilded Age empire refused to die. To understand why Biltmore's survival is extraordinary, we must examine the architectural reality of what George Vanderbilt built. Long after the Gilded Age ended, Biltmore continued to impose demands not simply aesthetic, but structural, mechanical, and environmental. Unlike many historic structures, Biltmore was built not as a museum piece, but as a fully living organism of stone, steel, wood, glass, and engineering systems decades ahead of its time. The French Renaissance facade alone introduced a lifetime of challenges. Indiana limestone, spectacular in appearance but vulnerable to water infiltration and temperature fluctuations, had to be maintained constantly. Where smaller homes might require periodic repairs, Biltmore required a cyclical preservation program with teams dedicated to masonry stabilization, waterproofing, pointing, and stone replacement. Every carved detail, gargoyles, finials, balustrades, represented ongoing costs, measured not in hundreds, but in thousands of hours of craftsmanship. Then there was the roof. The steep-pitched, chateau-style roof, composed of massive copper sheets and heavy slate tiles, was a triumph of late 19th century engineering. But it also aged like a living thing. Temperature expansion, hailstorms, seasonal snow loads, and mechanical stress placed unrelenting demands on its structure. Even during George's lifetime, roofing maintenance was perpetual. Today, it remains a cornerstone of Biltmore's preservation program, an undertaking requiring workers with specialized training in historical roofing techniques that few in the world still practice. The house's interior systems posed additional challenges. The heating system, innovative for the 1,890 seconds, relied on extensive steam piping, complex circulation routes, and temperature regulation that was delicate even under perfect conditions. Over more than a century, modernization required threading new systems, electrical wiring, climate control conduits, fire suppression pipes through walls never designed to hold them. Preservation demanded not only funding, but engineering creativity, architectural sensitivity, and a long-term strategy that most American estates never possessed. This is key to understanding Biltmore's survival secret. Biltmore could not be preserved cheaply or passively. It required a preservation economy wealthy enough to sustain it, a community large enough to support it, and a leadership vision committed to integrating modern engineering with historic authenticity. That combination rarely exists, but at Biltmore, it became the norm. Biltmore as a conservation landmark. Many people today see Biltmore as a house. In reality, its impact extends far beyond architecture. It shaped American conservation policy long before conservation became a national ideal. Under the guidance of Gifford Pinchot and later Carl A. Schenck, the estate became the birthplace of modern American forestry. At a time when large-scale logging devastated the eastern United States, Biltmore tested sustainable timber practices that would eventually become the foundation of the U.S. Forest Service. This is another survival secret. Biltmore did not exist merely to showcase wealth. It existed to test the future. George Vanderbilt believed that land should be improved, not exhausted. He believed forests should replenish themselves, agriculture should evolve, and soil should be healed. This philosophy gave Biltmore a purpose beyond aesthetics, a purpose that would later justify its preservation when so many other estates lacked reason to exist. When Edith sold tens of thousands of acres to the federal government during the Great Depression, she was not liquidating assets for convenience. She was transferring a conservation legacy into public stewardship. The formation of Pisgah National Forest was not a retreat, but a victory, an affirmation of the estate's long-term purpose. Today, millions hike, camp, and explore the land that once belonged to Biltmore. They are unknowingly participating in George's original vision: land as a resource for education, research, and renewal. Inside Biltmore's social machine. To match the scale of your original script, we must now examine the human infrastructure that kept Biltmore alive. Not just servants, but the social networks that moved through the estate over decades. During the Gilded Age, social power was as important as wealth. Biltmore attracted not only authors and artists, but political figures, industrial leaders, and cultural thinkers. It served as a quiet refuge where ideas could be exchanged outside the pressures of urban society. House parties lasted weeks. Guests arrived with trunks containing formal attire, hunting clothes, outdoor wear, and evening ensembles. They followed a schedule of breakfasts, outdoor excursions, lectures, library reading sessions, musical evenings, and midnight gatherings in the winter garden. These rituals, borrowed from English country house culture, helped maintain the estate's social relevance. But this lifestyle also created expectations Biltmore had to meet even after George's death. Maintaining the library, banquet hall, conservatory, winter garden, and guest rooms was not simply nostalgia. It was a way of preserving the estate's cultural identity. After Biltmore opened to the public in 1930, this identity transformed into an educational experience for visitors. What had once been an elite environment became a democratic one. The same rooms that hosted Wharton, James, Roosevelt, and Sargent now hosted schoolchildren, families, scholars, artists, and tourists. This democratization was not just a financial strategy. It was a cultural repositioning that preserved the house's meaning. Biltmore did not decline into irrelevance because it remained culturally useful first to the elite, then to the nation. The economic years of risk and reinvention. To match the full depth of your original script, we must now examine not only the cultural and architectural factors, but the economic transitions that threatened the estate at every turn. The 1,930 seconds saw revenue collapse across America. Tourism helped, but maintenance costs remained overwhelming. Heating, staffing, repairs, and taxation stretched finances thin. For many estates, this was the breaking point. Homes closed, art collections were sold, land was subdivided, but Biltmore adapted again. During World War II, the estate became a secure repository for priceless paintings from the National Gallery of Art. This partnership reinforced Biltmore's national significance and generated operational support during lean years. After the war, tourism resumed. But the world had changed. Families took shorter vacations. Air travel redirected tourism patterns. Automobiles made travel more flexible but more competitive. That is when the next generation stepped in. William A. Cecil and the business model that saved everything. William Cecil approached Biltmore with a question no previous generation dared ask. What if preservation requires profit? His answer reshaped the estate's trajectory. Tourism became the foundation, but not the sole engine. The estate expanded carefully, never in a way that compromised historical integrity. The winery brought national attention. The hotel brought sustained revenue. Retail areas, restaurants, outdoor activities, and event hosting brought diversification. Agricultural production continued, but now with commercial outlets. The estate became a brand luxury inspired by heritage, hospitality, grounded in authenticity, conservation, rooted in legacy. This business model was more than a financial strategy. It was a philosophical evolution. Where George built beauty, William built sustainability. Where Edith preserved legacy, William expanded purpose. Their combined contributions formed a blueprint for every historic estate seeking long-term survival. By the late 20th century, Biltmore had transitioned from a fragile heirloom into a dynamic enterprise with a diversified economic structure. But the estate's survival was not guaranteed merely by the introduction of a winery or the expansion of tourism. True preservation demanded something more complex: the ability to reinterpret the estate's purpose continually, decade after decade, as American culture and economics shifted. This adaptability began with a principle that no Gilded Age estate had ever embraced: the idea that heritage can be both preserved and monetized without compromising authenticity. Many historic properties feared commercialization, believing it would diminish their dignity. Instead, this hesitation often led to financial collapse. Biltmore took the opposite path. It embraced responsible commercial expansion as a preservation strategy, not a contradiction. The first step was establishing a deep understanding of the modern tourist. Visitors no longer wanted passive walkthroughs. They wanted immersive experiences. They wanted storytelling. They wanted to feel connected to the lives lived inside the walls, not simply observe objects arranged behind ropes. To meet this demand, Biltmore introduced interpretive programs, guided tours, architectural and preservation talks, seasonal exhibitions, and audio experiences. The goal was not to overwhelm visitors with information, but to draw them into the estate's internal logic, its architecture, engineering, social rituals, and environmental significance. The rise of experiential tourism. Biltmore recognized that its greatest strength was not only the mansion itself, but the emotional resonance the property created. Visitors didn't simply admire the decor, they imagined themselves inside the story of the Gilded Age. They envisioned arriving in carriages, dining under a 70-foot ceiling, reading in George Vanderbilt's library, or wandering through the conservatory. This emotional dimension became a foundational part of Biltmore's survival strategy. Holiday celebrations transformed the estate each winter. Thousands of ornaments, towering Christmas trees, garlands, wreaths, and floral designs recreated the spectacle of the first Christmas Eve opening in 1895. The effect was not only nostalgic but immersive, drawing visitors back year after year. Spring bloom events shifted the focus outdoors, showcasing the achievements of Frederick Law Olmsted's design. Tulips, azaleas, rhododendrons, roses, and native plantings turned the grounds into a living exhibition of American landscape architecture. Concert series introduced music into the estate's nighttime atmosphere, blending culture with experience. Weddings and corporate events took advantage of the panoramic mountain views and architectural grandeur, providing high-value revenue streams while introducing new audiences to the estate. These developments were not mere attractions. They formed a cultural ecosystem that kept Biltmore relevant. Agriculture reborn. Agriculture was an original pillar of George Vanderbilt's estate vision, but by the mid-20th century, its role needed reinvention. The estate shifted from subsistence-style farming to a modern agricultural operation with commercial outputs. Today, Biltmore grows produce for its restaurants, raises livestock, cultivates flowers for estate floral design, manages vineyards, and operates nurseries. Livestock rotations improve soil health. Estate-raised beef and lamb supply the restaurants. Specialty crops support the estate's culinary program. This structure serves three purposes: economic sustainability, reducing dependence on external suppliers; brand integrity, ensuring the estate-to-table concept remains authentic; heritage continuity, preserving Biltmore's agricultural legacy. Agriculture is no longer merely functional, it is a core part of Biltmore's identity. Hospitality integration. The introduction of the inn on Biltmore Estate transformed the estate from a day-trip destination into a multi-day resort experience. Guests were no longer limited to touring the house. They could stay overnight, dine on estate-grown food, explore trails, ride horses, enjoy spa services, and participate in wine tastings. This shift created a hospitality brand rooted in historical prestige and modern comfort. Later expansions, including the Village Hotel and additional guest amenities, broadened the estate's appeal. Families, couples, business travelers, and international tourists could all find a version of Biltmore suited to their interests and budgets. The estate had become a destination, not simply a historical attraction. Environmental stewardship in the 21st century. Biltmore's survival is closely tied to environmental sustainability. With 8,000 acres under active stewardship, the estate functions as a vast ecological laboratory. Modern forestry practices continue the legacy of Pinchot and Schenck. Water management systems ensure long-term environmental health. Wildlife conservation protects diverse species. Native plant restoration combats erosion and supports regional biodiversity. Far from being stuck in the past, Biltmore operates at the forefront of environmental innovation. This is perhaps the most surprising element of its survival. The estate has become more ecologically relevant today than at any point in its history. The house as a living artifact. Preservation at Biltmore is unlike preservation anywhere else. Historic sites often freeze themselves in time, allowing no changes for fear of diminishing authenticity. But Biltmore's authenticity lies in use, not stagnation. Rooms remain functional. Fireplaces are periodically lit. Decorations change seasonally. Conservatory plants are rotated. Carpets must withstand foot traffic. Furnishings require not only restoration but durability. The estate maintains an in-house team of conservators specializing in textile repair, furniture conservation, artwork restoration, stone cleaning and stabilization, woodwork preservation, archival protection. Their work ensures that the mansion remains both historically accurate and physically resilient. The cultural meaning of Biltmore. As the estate evolved, its cultural significance deepened. Biltmore became not only a monument to Gilded Age excess, but a reflection of American adaptability. It came to symbolize the idea that even the grandest visions can endure if stewarded wisely. Visitors today see the estate not as a relic, but as a thriving example of architectural mastery, environmental stewardship, historical continuity, family legacy, adaptive business strategy. This layered identity gives Biltmore a cultural weight far beyond its walls. Family stewardship in the modern era. Perhaps the most unusual element of Biltmore's survival is the continued involvement of the Vanderbilt descendants. Few American estates remain family-owned. Even fewer remain successfully operated by the very families who built them. This continuity creates a unique dynamic. Decisions are not made by distant boards or external institutions, but by people whose names are tied to the history of the house. This personal connection reinforces long-term thinking over short-term profit. The commitment remains the same as George Vanderbilt's original vision: to create beauty, preserve knowledge, and steward the land. To fully understand how Biltmore survived when nearly every other Gilded Age estate collapsed, we must look beyond architecture, beyond economics, and beyond the visible layers of tourism. We must examine the unseen forces, the cultural, psychological, and historical dynamics that shape the estate's ongoing relevance. The myth of the American castle. In the United States, the concept of aristocratic estates never took permanent root. Unlike Europe, where castles and manors evolved across centuries, American fortunes rose quickly and often fell just as fast. The Gilded Age produced wealth unprecedented in American history, but it also produced mansions whose purpose was tied entirely to social competition. Biltmore broke this pattern by anchoring itself not in social performance, but in ideology. George Vanderbilt did not build Biltmore to dominate New York society or outshine other elite families. He built it to express his intellectual values, art, knowledge, forestry, architecture, and conservation. This ideological foundation granted the estate resilience, because its purpose was not tied to a single era's social norms. When the Gilded Age collapsed, estates built for display collapsed with it. But Biltmore, built for culture, education, and land stewardship, retained purpose. This difference in foundational intent is one of the most overlooked keys to its survival. The power of story. Every historic site tells a story, but Biltmore's story is unique. It spans 3 generations of transformation. George's era, creation and cultivation. Edith's era, Preservation under crisis. William Cecil's era. Reinvention and modernization. Each era adds a chapter, creating a narrative arc far more compelling than estates frozen at a single point in time. The power of this evolving story became a magnet for public interest. People do not come to Biltmore simply to see antiques, they come to witness a saga of endurance. The estate embodies a distinctly American myth, that innovation and determination can preserve even the most improbable dreams. The economics of scale and symbolism. Surprisingly, Biltmore's massive size, initially its greatest liability, eventually became its greatest strength. Its scale made it unlike anything else. The sheer magnitude drew curiosity, attention, and reverence. People were willing to travel farther, spend more, and return more frequently to experience something truly singular. Scale became spectacle. Spectacle became sustainability. This phenomenon mirrors the economics of iconic landmarks worldwide. The Eiffel Tower, originally criticized as an eyesore, became an economic engine because it was unlike anything else. Biltmore followed the same pattern, an architectural outlier that grew into a cultural symbol. The psychological pull of grandeur. Visitors often describe an emotional reaction upon seeing Biltmore for the first time. The limestone facade rising against the Blue Ridge Mountains creates a tension between nature and architecture that feels almost cinematic. The curved approach road, designed by Olmsted, conceals the house until the final moment of reveal. This psychological staging was intentional, and it still works. Humans are drawn to scale, symmetry, and craftsmanship that feel beyond the reach of ordinary life. Biltmore engages these instincts, creating a sense of awe that transcends historical curiosity. This emotional reaction turns visitors into advocates. Word of mouth becomes preservation. The American appetite for luxury reframed as heritage. Modern visitors no longer see Biltmore's luxury as extravagance, they see it as craftsmanship. This shift in perspective reflects a broader cultural change. In the 1,890 seconds, luxury was a symbol of inequality. In the 1,930 seconds, it became a sign of reckless excess. But by the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, as industrial craftsmanship declined and mass production rose, people began to appreciate the skill embedded in historic architecture. Biltmore became a sanctuary for craftsmanship, a place where preservation protected, a level of artistry rarely attainable today. The estate's continued existence allows visitors to witness hand-carved stonework, imported European wood paneling, centuries-old tapestries, elaborate ironwork, artisan-crafted flooring, historically accurate finishes, 19th-century engineering systems. These details transform Biltmore from a relic of wealth into a museum of lost craftsmanship. Biltmore as an economic engine. Beyond cultural meaning, Biltmore supports thousands of jobs in western North Carolina. It fuels local tourism, hospitality, agriculture, retail, and supporting industries. The estate's economic gravity ensures not only its own preservation, but the prosperity of the surrounding region. This economic role is another survival secret. Biltmore became too valuable to lose. It is not merely a house, it is a regional economic institution, a model for historic preservation worldwide. Experts in architecture, tourism, and conservation often cite Biltmore as a model for sustainable historic preservation. This is because it demonstrates 5 rare qualities: continuous family stewardship, economic diversification, architectural and environmental authenticity, adaptive business expansion, cultural relevance maintained across generations. Few historic estates anywhere in the world achieve all 5 simultaneously. The estate as a living laboratory, Biltmore continues to evolve through research and experimentation. Modern teams collaborate with universities and environmental institutions to study land management, soil rehabilitation, sustainable agriculture, water conservation, historical materials, science, climate-responsive preservation. This scientific relevance adds another layer to Biltmore's identity. It is not simply a memory or a monument, it is a functional research environment shaped by modern needs. The psychological impact of family legacy. Generational responsibility played a crucial role in the estate's survival. Each successor felt a personal duty, not merely a financial one, to honor George Vanderbilt's vision. This emotional bond created long-term decision-making that preserved the estate's integrity. Where many other estates were sold due to lack of personal attachment, Biltmore remained in family hands because its meaning transcended monetary value. To fully match the scope and weight of the original material, the story must now move through the critical decades of crisis, the periods when Biltmore's survival was not simply improbable, but almost impossible. These moments forged the estate's identity. They forced innovations that reshaped its purpose, and they exposed a truth at the heart of the Biltmore saga. Resilience is not a single decision. It is a series of decisions made under pressure, repeated across generations. The financial storm of the 1,920 seconds. The 1,920 seconds were paradoxical. They dazzled with prosperity yet hid structural weaknesses that would soon collapse the global economy. For Biltmore, the decade posed a multi-layered threat. Income tax evolved from a wartime necessity into a permanent fixture. Estate taxes escalated. Agricultural markets fluctuated unpredictably. And, most importantly, the culture of American wealth transformed. The ostentatious display of Gilded Age luxury began to seem outdated and uncomfortable for families maintaining old estates. As urban modernism rose, mountain palaces felt increasingly out of place. Biltmore had already reduced staff. Some wings were closed seasonally. Entertaining was more limited. The estate could not ignore economic reality. Yet Edith Vanderbilt refused to let these pressures undermine the estate's dignity or purpose. Her leadership during this decade was defined by calm discipline, an approach that kept Biltmore afloat through instability. The Great Depression, a turning point. The crash of 1,929 hit the Vanderbilt fortune hard. Investments evaporated, revenue from agricultural operations dwindled, tourism was non-existent. Heating a 250-room house during an economic collapse swallowed enormous financial resources. Servant wages remained a necessity. Maintenance could not simply stop. In this moment, many American estates collapsed. Homes were shuttered, art collections sold, land subdivided. But Edith Vanderbilt did the opposite of what the era expected. She innovated. In 1930, she made the single most radical decision in the estate's history, opening Biltmore House to the public. This act was not merely an economic strategy, it was a cultural redefinition. A private home became a public experience. A symbol of elite exclusivity became accessible to ordinary Americans for $1 per ticket. Visitors arrived out of curiosity, reverence, or simply the desire to witness beauty during a bleak period. The estate's doors opened to farmers, teachers, factory workers, families, people who would never have imagined walking through the banquet hall or library of a Vanderbilt. This openness not only generated revenue, it created a relationship. The public became emotionally invested in Biltmore's preservation, and that relationship would become one of the estate's most powerful survival tools. Land reduction as strategic preservation. After the estate opened to the public, the next strategic move was even more consequential. In 1932, Edith sold nearly 86,000 acres of forest land to the U.S. government, facilitating the creation of Pisgah National Forest. This decision is often misunderstood as a loss. In reality, it saved Biltmore. The sale generated crucial capital. It reduced the estate's footprint to a manageable size. It preserved George Vanderbilt's forestry vision for the nation. And it prevented land encroachment from development, a threat that ultimately dismantled many other historic estates. This moment marked Biltmore's transition from private sanctuary to public environmental legacy. World War II and the House of Hidden Treasures. As global conflict erupted again in the 1,940 seconds, Biltmore entered another extraordinary chapter. Fearing bombing raids on Washington, D.C., the National Gallery of Art searched for a secure refuge to protect some of the nation's most priceless masterpieces. Edith offered Biltmore crates containing paintings by Botticelli, Rembrandt, Van Dyck, and other masters were quietly transported to the estate and stored in secured rooms. Armed guards protected the collections. The house that once sheltered scholars and artists now sheltered the greatest artistic treasures in the country. This partnership strengthened Biltmore's national significance and demonstrated its adaptability during times of crisis. Post-war America and the modernization challenge. After World War II, the country shifted again. Suburban living expanded. Historic homes struggled to stay relevant. Americans wanted mobility, convenience, and new forms of entertainment. Tourism rebounded, but competition also grew. Biltmore could no longer rely solely on its historical charm. It needed modernization without compromising authenticity. This period required a delicate balance, updating electrical systems, repairing masonry, aging under natural stress, restoring original wallpapers, fabrics, and artworks, reinforcing structural components, managing humidity and climate conditions, expanding interpretation and educational programs. These projects demanded scientific precision and financial resources. Yet Biltmore continued to invest in itself, not as a relic but as a living cultural institution. Cornelia and the transformation of the estate's social role. Cornelia Vanderbilt grew up in the house, married there, and gave birth to both her sons within the estate. But her relationship with Biltmore was complex. She loved its beauty, yet resisted the expectations that came with being its heiress. Ultimately, she chose a different life, leaving the estate behind for long periods. Her departure marked another turning point. It became clear that Biltmore's future would not rely on traditional inheritance patterns. Instead, it depended on leadership, driven by skill, vision, and practicality, not merely birthright. This realization set the stage for the next era of survival. The Cecil era, a business model rooted in heritage. After Edith's death in 1958, stewardship passed to her grandsons William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil and George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil. Their leadership marked the beginning of Biltmore's transformation into a modern enterprise. William Cecil, especially, recognized that heritage alone could not sustain the estate. It needed financial diversification, long-term business planning, professional staffing, strategic infrastructure investments, a reimagined visitor experience. He treated the estate with the rigor of a corporate enterprise, but the respect of a family member honoring a legacy. This rare combination business acumen tied to emotional stewardship became one of the most powerful tools in Biltmore's survival. By the mid-20th century, Biltmore had survived wars, economic crises, tax revolutions, and the dissolution of the Gilded Age elite. Yet the estate faced an entirely new challenge: the expectations of the modern American public. People no longer traveled only to observe historical sites. They sought immersive experiences, culinary exploration, environmental connection, and personal transformation. For Biltmore to remain relevant, it needed to evolve far beyond being a mansion tour. This required not a small adjustment, but a complete reinterpretation of what the estate could become. Tourism reimagined. Biltmore's earliest tours offered only the first floor. Visitors in the 1,930 seconds saw a small portion of the house, just enough to marvel at its scale. But by the 1,970 seconds, this approach felt outdated. Audiences wanted narrative depth, behind-the-scenes access, and a deeper connection to the Vanderbilt family story. William A. Cecil recognized this cultural shift and began redesigning the visitor experience. This included expanded public access to bedrooms, servant areas, and working spaces, curated tours focusing on architecture, lifestyle, and preservation, rotating exhibitions that highlighted specific aspects of the estate's history, restored rooms previously closed off to the public, enhanced interpretive materials, including audio guides. Every addition increased engagement while preserving authenticity. The birth of Biltmore's winery, a turning point. Perhaps the most transformative decision of the Cecil era was the establishment of the Biltmore Winery. What began as a bold experiment became one of the estate's most profitable enterprises. The winery utilized estate-grown grapes, European winemaking techniques, historic agricultural facilities repurposed for modern use. The result was more than a commercial venture. It was a continuation of George Vanderbilt's agricultural legacy. Winemaking required soil analysis, vineyard expansion, expertise in fermentation science. Marketing aligned with Biltmore's identity. Yet perhaps the most important aspect was cultural positioning. The winery transformed Biltmore into a destination that appealed not only to history enthusiasts, but to culinary travelers, wine lovers, and lifestyle tourists. This broadened the estate's demographic reach and deepened its financial stability, hospitality expansion, and the reinvention of estate living. Before the early 2000s, visitors typically spent only a few hours at Biltmore. The estate's economic potential was limited by these short visits. William Cecil recognized that Biltmore's landscape, architecture, and atmosphere positioned it perfectly for extended stays. Thus emerged the next major expansion, the Inn on Biltmore Estate. The inn allowed guests to wake up overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. Dine on estate-grown foods. Access exclusive estate activities. Enjoy luxury, inspired by George Vanderbilt's vision. Later, the Village Hotel extended this approach, making overnight stays accessible to wider audiences. This hospitality expansion was crucial because it increased average visitor spending, created new revenue streams, anchored the estate as a multi-day destination, strengthened the financial model supporting preservation. Today, hospitality is one of the pillars sustaining Biltmore's ongoing restoration work. Retail, crafts, and economic diversification. To further stabilize the estate, Biltmore expanded into retail products rooted in its brand identity. Wines sold nationwide, home decor, plants and gardening products, books, prints, and historical reproductions, specialty foods and estate-branded kitchen items. These products transformed Biltmore into a lifestyle brand carefully curated, historically inspired, and aligned with the aesthetic values of the estate. Unlike mass-produced souvenirs, these items carried the ethos of craftsmanship that defined George Vanderbilt's original vision. Behind the scenes, preservation engineering. To maintain credibility as both a museum and a luxury destination, the estate invested heavily in professional preservation. This behind-the-scenes work rarely appears in promotional material, but is essential to Biltmore's survival. Teams of conservators, engineers, archivists, and artisans work continuously on structural stabilization, environmental controls, artwork conservation, restoration of original finishes, repair of historic textiles, specialized masonry work, preservation of antique books, maintenance of landscaping and water systems. Large-scale projects often require years of planning, sometimes involving partnerships with national preservation organizations, universities, or scientific institutions. This level of technical care ensures the estate remains not only beautiful but structurally sound. Biltmore and the rise of American heritage culture. In the late 20th century, Americans experienced a renewed interest in heritage tourism. Families wanted to connect with the past. Schools sought educational field trips. Retirees traveled to culturally significant landmarks. Biltmore became a leading example of how private estates could leverage this cultural shift. But unlike historic houses that relied solely on nostalgia, Biltmore integrated contemporary relevance. Visitors could learn about conservation, explore sustainable agriculture, understand architectural history, engage with design and craftsmanship, experience seasonal horticultural displays, enjoy culinary and wine-focused experiences. This multifaceted approach created sustained public interest. Biltmore as a regional anchor. The estate's influence extends beyond its borders. It supports a local economy built on hospitality, transportation, food and agriculture, art and craftsmanship, landscaping and horticulture, retail and manufacturing, hotel workers, tour guides, retail employees, farmers, artists, and contractors all rely on the estate for employment. Asheville's identity is deeply tied to Biltmore's presence. This regional dependence reinforces the estate's importance. It is not merely a private landmark. It is an economic engine making its preservation a public interest as well as a private responsibility. How Biltmore avoided the fate of Newport and Fifth Avenue. To match the analytical depth of your original script, we must now examine a core question. Why did Biltmore survive when so many other Vanderbilt properties were lost? The answer lies in key contrasts. Fifth Avenue mansions relied on urban prestige. Biltmore relied on cultural identity. Newport cottages were seasonal and socially competitive. Biltmore was year-round and philosophically grounded. Other estates lacked agricultural foundations. Biltmore had thousands of acres supporting self-sufficiency. Many heirs lacked commitment. Biltmore's heirs saw preservation as duty. Most estates resisted commercialization. Biltmore embraced it responsibly. Many mansions appealed to nostalgia. Biltmore appealed to enduring value. In essence, Biltmore survived because it was never merely a symbol of wealth. It was a system, economic, cultural, agricultural, architectural, and ideological. Systems evolve, symbols do not. And that difference determined which estates lived and which died. As Biltmore entered the late 20th and early 21st centuries, its transformation accelerated. What had once been a remote mountain chateau, built by a solitary intellectual, had become a national symbol, an evolving blueprint showing how America's great estates might survive in a world that no longer created them. To reach the full scale of your original script, we must now explore how Biltmore transcended its origins to become a model not merely a tourist attraction, but a case study in preservation, enterprise, and heritage management. The estate as a business school case study. Universities, business schools, and tourism organizations have studied Biltmore's operations for years, because the estate demonstrates something rare in historic preservation. It successfully monetized heritage without compromising integrity. Many historic estates walk a difficult line, become too commercial, and they lose authenticity, become too academic, and they lose revenue, remain too static, and they lose relevance, expand too quickly, and they lose identity. Biltmore avoided all four traps. Its business model is built on vertical integration. Agriculture supports dining. Dining supports hospitality. Hospitality supports tourism. Tourism supports preservation. Preservation supports brand identity. Brand identity supports retail. Retail supports agriculture. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where each operation strengthens the whole. This economic structure is what allows Biltmore to do what nearly no other American mansion has done: remain in private family ownership for more than 130 years. The ethical dimension of preservation. To match your original script's breadth, we must address the ethical dimension of Biltmore's survival. Preserving a vast estate built during an era of extreme wealth raises questions about privilege, inequality, and responsibility. Biltmore addresses these questions by emphasizing environmental stewardship, community support, educational outreach, public accessibility, cultural democratization. It offers more than spectacle. It offers insight into American history, industrialization, conservation, architecture, domestic service, gender roles, land use, technological change. The estate's exhibitions and interpretive programs contextualize wealth rather than glorify it. Visitors don't see Biltmore as an idle display of extravagance, they see it as a window into American transformation. The meaning of family ownership. Family ownership shapes every decision at Biltmore. Unlike many historic homes managed by boards, governments, or nonprofits, Biltmore's leadership remains personal and generational. Each descendant inherits not only a business but a responsibility to maintain George Vanderbilt's vision, to honor Edith's sacrifices, to extend William Cecil's innovations, to adapt to modern demands without compromising heritage. This personal responsibility creates continuity, rarely found in historic preservation. A board may respond to public pressure. A government may respond to political shifts. A corporation may respond to profit margins. But a family responds to legacy. Biltmore's cultural impact on Asheville and Western North Carolina. It is impossible to separate Biltmore's survival from the growth of Asheville itself. When George first arrived, Asheville was a modest health resort town. By the 21st century, it had become a tourism hub, an arts destination, a culinary center, a cultural landmark, a regional economic engine. Biltmore played a direct role in shaping this development. The estate anchored tourism infrastructure, roads, rail access, hospitality services long before the region urbanized. Today, its presence contributes hundreds of millions of dollars to the local economy, supporting thousands of jobs and attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. This mutual dependence, Biltmore supporting Asheville, Asheville supporting Biltmore, forms another hidden survival mechanism. The estate thrives within a supportive community, rather than in isolation. Biltmore and the American imagination. Biltmore occupies a unique place in the American imagination. It represents the height of craftsmanship, the ambition of the Gilded Age, the fragility of wealth, the necessity of adaptation, the endurance of vision. Movies, books, documentaries, and television segments have featured the estate, further weaving it into the cultural fabric of the nation. But beyond the media image, Biltmore resonates because it offers something rare in America: a living encounter with grandeur, a tangible connection to an era that shaped the country's identity. The preservation philosophy: evolve or disappear. Unlike many historic sites that cling to the past, Biltmore adopts a philosophy of permeable preservation. This principle guides its operations. Preserve the structure, preserve the art, preserve the landscape, preserve the stories, but evolve the purpose. This is the secret that allowed Biltmore to endure when others vanished. Preservation is not the opposite of change. Preservation requires change. The estate's leadership understood that the past cannot be frozen. It can only be honored through relevance, seasonal transformations, and visitor loyalty. To maintain relevance, Biltmore transforms itself constantly. Christmas at Biltmore, a tradition dating back to 1895, now one of the most elaborate holiday displays in America. Spring blooms and Olmsted's Gardens, a tribute to landscape architecture and the renewal of nature. Summer events, concerts, and outdoor activities, expanding the estate into a cultural venue. Autumn foliage and harvest festivals, connecting the estate's agricultural roots to modern celebrations. These seasonal changes create perpetual demand. Visitors return not once, but repeatedly. This loyalty is essential to financial stability. The architecture of experience. Modern Biltmore is designed around emotional architecture. The idea that the estate should evoke not only admiration, but feeling. The visitor journey is curated. Anticipation along the approach road. Awe at the first sight of the facade. Curiosity in the winter garden. Intimacy in the bedrooms. Grandeur in the banquet hall. Intellectual engagement in the library. Contemplation in the gardens. Pleasure in wine tasting. Comfort in the hotels. Each transition is deliberate. Each moment reinforces the estate's identity. Each experience deepens the connection between visitor and history. Historic authenticity in a commercial world. One of Biltmore's most impressive accomplishments is retaining authenticity while operating commercially. The estate avoided kitschy displays, theatrical reinterpretations, modern intrusions, artificial remodeling, non-historic decor. Every addition and alteration aligns with the estate's aesthetic and historical integrity. This restraint is unusual in the tourism industry. It marks Biltmore as a site of genuine heritage, not entertainment disguised as history. How preservation becomes a national conversation. Biltmore's success has influenced preservation policy nationwide. It demonstrated that private estates can remain viable. Tourism can support historic conservation. Agriculture can complement heritage. Family ownership can sustain legacy. Diversification is essential. Architecture and landscape must be preserved together. This influence extends to museums, national parks, and historic homes across the country. Biltmore is more than a survivor. It is a teacher. To match the depth and density of your original Biltmore trilogy, we must now examine the most invisible, least glamorous, and yet most essential part of the estate's survival. The behind-the-scenes systems that keep Biltmore functioning day after day, year after year. Most visitors see the grandeur, few see the infrastructure, and yet it is this hidden machinery, technical, logistical, organizational, that transforms Biltmore from a static relic into a living institution. The reality of operating a 250-room house. Maintaining a house of Biltmore's size is equivalent to operating a museum, a hotel, a small municipality, a large farm, an entertainment venue, a research center, all at the same time. Every part of the estate requires continuous oversight. Nothing about the house functions by accident. To keep the mansion operational, teams must manage electrical systems originally installed in the 1,890 seconds but continually updated, steam heating involving miles of piping traveling through the walls, climate control systems calibrated to protect art, wood, and books, fire suppression equipment hidden discreetly to preserve historical aesthetics, plumbing networks retrofitted to prevent damage to historic materials, security systems unobtrusive but essential, lighting systems that balance ambiance with conservation needs. These systems require constant monitoring. A single leak, a minor wiring fault, or a humidity imbalance can cause catastrophic damage. The conservation laboratories. Biltmore's conservation departments operate like the labs of a world-class museum. Specialists trained in textile science, wood preservation, paper conservation, metals restoration, painting and varnish stabilization, historical materials analysis, work year-round to maintain the estate's thousands of artifacts. The team restores antique carpets, upholstered furniture, gilded frames, hand-painted ceilings, imported marble, tiled surfaces, rare book bindings, tapestries dating to the Renaissance. Each restoration can take months or years. Some require collaboration with international experts. Unlike museums, which often rotate objects or keep fragile pieces in storage, Biltmore displays most of its original furnishings in situ. This increases conservation challenges, but preserves historical authenticity. The environmental control challenge. One of the greatest threats to any historic house is environmental fluctuation. Temperature, humidity, light levels, and air quality can degrade materials irreversibly. Biltmore's preservation engineers face a monumental task: preventing wood cracking, avoiding condensation that can cause mold, protecting textiles from UV exposure, maintaining stable humidity for books and paper, preventing fluctuations that can damage plaster and paint. Modern renovations introduced high-tech climate systems behind walls, beneath floors, and above ceilings, installed with minimal disturbance to original architecture. These unseen improvements are part of why Biltmore appears timeless. Preservation is not a matter of mere repair, it is continuous environmental control. The workforce behind the wonder. The original estate required 80 servants. Today, Biltmore employs more than 2,000 people across multiple departments: horticulture, conservation, guest services, culinary arts, security, agriculture, maintenance, hospitality, retail, archives and interpretation, events and planning. This modern workforce is not merely operational, it is part of the estate's identity. The sheer size of the staff reflects how many hands it takes to keep a vision alive. Training the next generation of craftspeople. The estate must train new artisans because many techniques required for preservation are no longer taught widely. These include hand-carving limestone repairs, restoring 19th century plaster techniques, repairing antique mechanical systems, replicating historic textiles, maintaining Olmsted-style landscapes. By teaching these skills, Biltmore serves as a living school of craftsmanship, water systems, land management, and environmental engineering. The estate's 8,000 acres include forests, rivers, ponds, meadows, agricultural fields, managed wildlife habitats. Maintaining these landscapes requires soil conservation, erosion control, water filtration, ecological monitoring, forestry rotations, wildlife management, flood prevention. These practices trace directly back to George Vanderbilt's original conservation philosophy, now executed with modern science. Why infrastructure matters to survival. Every historic estate struggles with infrastructure, but what differentiates Biltmore is its proactive approach. Preservation is planned decades in advance. Financial reserves support contingencies. Major restoration projects occur in cycles. This long-range thinking is part of the estate's DNA. George Vanderbilt thought in centuries. Edith Vanderbilt thought in decades. William Cecil thought in generations. Today, Biltmore's leadership continues with this mindset. Short-term profit never overrides long-term preservation. This is the single most overlooked reason the estate survived. It was always managed as a legacy, never as a commodity. The psychological experience of preservation. Visitors often describe Biltmore as alive. This feeling is intentional. The estate aims to preserve not only objects, but atmosphere. Guests can smell fresh flowers arranged daily, hear fires crackling in season, see sunlight moving across carved paneling, walk through landscapes designed for sensory experience, feel the contrast between intimate spaces and grand volumes. These emotional cues make Biltmore immersive. They make history feel lived in, not distant. This immersion builds lasting emotional connection, and emotional connection fuels return visits. The role of archives and research. Behind the scenes, archivists study original architectural plans, letters and diaries, servant logs, visitor lists, receipts and invoices, early photographs, design sketches, technical drawings. These documents inform restoration choices and interpretive programs. They ensure accuracy in room arrangement, furnishings, textiles, art placement, paint colors, lighting styles. The story told to visitors is not imagination, it is research-based authenticity. Seasonal labor and horticultural mastery. The gardens require a massive, specialized workforce. Olmsted's designs were not static. They were ecological plans requiring soil rehabilitation, shade management, strategic pruning, season-by-season plant rotation, propagation from estate nurseries, long-term forest succession planning. Today, horticultural staff maintain miles of walking paths, formal gardens, rose gardens, Italian gardens, walled gardens, conservatory plant collections, arboretums, woodland trails. Their work blends science with aesthetics, preserving the living component of the estate's design. The cost of being extraordinary. Operating Biltmore costs tens of millions of dollars annually. Preservation itself is a massive, recurring investment. Yet the estate does not rely on external funding or government subsidies. It sustains itself through tourism, wine production, hospitality, retail, agriculture, events, brand products. This self-sustaining model is exceptionally rare and one of the primary reasons Biltmore remains privately owned. To fully match the scale of your original Biltmore script, we must now examine one of the most fundamental dynamics underpinning the estate's survival across more than a century: continuity. Where other Gilded Age mansions collapsed under the pressures of time, inheritance disputes, tax law, or financial strain, Biltmore endured because each generation understood an essential truth. A legacy is not kept alive through wealth alone, but through stewardship. Biltmore's survival is not a story of financial might, it is a story of long-term responsibility. Inheritance as obligation, not reward. When George Vanderbilt died unexpectedly in 1914, he left behind a monumental home, a vast estate, complex land operations, agricultural commitments, conservation projects, enormous costs, and a daughter who was just 13 years old. For many families, such an inheritance would have been a burden too heavy to carry. Yet Edith Vanderbilt assumed stewardship with unwavering resolve. Her leadership set a precedent. The estate is not a possession. It is a responsibility, one that must be preserved, defended, and adapted. This philosophy shaped every subsequent generation. Cornelia Vanderbilt, the heir, unwilling to conform. Cornelia's relationship with Biltmore reflected the tension between tradition and autonomy. Raised in privilege but by a mother who understood hardship, Cornelia grew up within a world bounded by duty. But Cornelia was not Edith. She was independent, artistic, restless. After marrying and having children, she found herself increasingly constrained by the expectations tied to Biltmore. Eventually, she left the estate and pursued a life abroad, choosing personal freedom over inherited responsibility. Her departure could have fractured the estate's future, but instead, it revealed something profound. Legacy does not always follow bloodlines directly. Sometimes it passes through shared values instead. Cornelia may have stepped away, but the responsibility did not collapse with her absence. Instead, it shifted to her sons. The divergent paths of the Cecil brothers. Cornelia and her husband, John Francis Amherst Cecil, had two sons: George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil, William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil. These two brothers would play distinct but complementary roles in Biltmore's survival. George Henry, the eldest, managed Biltmore Farms, an agricultural enterprise rooted in the estate's early mission. Over time, Biltmore Farms grew into a major development and hospitality company, shaping modern Asheville. William Amherst, the younger brother, returned to America after a career in finance and assumed leadership of Biltmore Estate itself. Their combined efforts created a dual legacy structure. One branch stewarded the land and economic development. The other stewarded the house and cultural heritage. This structure proved essential to Biltmore's survival. It allowed the estate to balance historic preservation, modern business strategies, agricultural operations, tourism management, long-term financial sustainability. William Cecil's defining philosophy. When William took control of the estate's operations in the 1960 seconds, he inherited challenges unprecedented in scale. He once famously said, "We do not preserve Biltmore because we are wealthy. We are wealthy because we preserve Biltmore." This mantra captured the essence of his approach. Preservation came first. Profit was a tool to support it. William recognized that Biltmore needed to evolve constantly. He expanded cultural programming, improved visitor engagement, and modernized business operations. But he never compromised authenticity. If a proposed change weakened the estate's integrity, it was rejected no matter how profitable it might have been. This uncompromising commitment built public trust and protected the estate's soul. The emotional weight of stewardship. Behind every decision was the psychological weight of inheritance. The estate was not just a business. It was their ancestors' vision made physical. George Vanderbilt had built the house not for social triumph but for intellectual refuge. Edith had preserved it through unimaginable hardship. William felt obligated to honor their sacrifices. This emotional inheritance, the intangible but powerful sense of duty, became the backbone of Biltmore's endurance. Where many other estate heirs sold their properties to avoid financial ruin or personal burden, the Cecil family embraced the burden. Taxation, law, and the threat of dissolution. One of the greatest threats to large estates in the 20th century was inheritance tax. Many prominent families were forced to sell land, art, or entire properties to pay estate taxes. Biltmore faced this threat repeatedly, but strategic planning, diversified revenue, and multi-generational coordination helped the family navigate these challenges. They made careful arrangements to ensure that property taxes could be managed. Estate taxes could be paid without breaking the estate. Succession plans were clear. Assets were structured to avoid forced liquidation. This financial planning required expert counsel and long-range vision. It was not luck. It was deliberate, disciplined preparation. The public perception of Biltmore and the burden of expectations. With public accessibility came public expectations. Visitors felt ownership in the estate's story. They viewed it as a national treasure. This created an unusual dual pressure. The estate had to satisfy the public's desire for authenticity. The estate had to innovate without provoking criticism. If Biltmore changed too much, it risked alienating visitors. If it changed too little, it risked financial stagnation. Balancing these opposing forces required exceptional sensitivity. Every decision whether to restore a room, open a new exhibit, build a hotel, or expand a garden had to maintain this delicate balance. The importance of interpretation and storytelling. Biltmore's survival is not only due to physical preservation or economic strategy. It owes its endurance to storytelling. The estate preserved. George's intellectual pursuits. Edith's resilience. Cornelia's complex journey. The servants' labor, the architects' and artisans' genius, the evolution of American society. By telling these stories, Biltmore transformed from a static mansion into a narrative experience. Visitors do not simply look at objects, they understand meanings. They see the humans behind the history. This emotional engagement solidifies the estate's relevance, from inheritance to institution. Over the decades, Biltmore evolved from a private home into a private cultural institution. Yet unlike museums or national parks, it retained warmth, humanity, and personal connection. Visitors feel that the house is lived in, not embalmed. The gardens feel tended, not abandoned. The vision feels ongoing, not complete. This is rare in preservation. Most historic properties become time capsules. Biltmore remained a living world. To complete a script equal in breadth, scale, and depth to the original material you provided, we now turn to the most profound and forward-looking dimension of Biltmore's survival, its transformation into a living legacy, an estate rooted in history yet oriented toward the future. This final segment explores how Biltmore operates not as a relic of the Gilded Age, but as an evolving testament to American ingenuity, environmental stewardship, cultural continuity, and multi-generational vision. The estate, as a living ecosystem. When George Vanderbilt envisioned Biltmore, he never intended it to be merely a house. He intended it as an ecological project, a place where land, architecture, and community formed a unified whole. Today, that ecosystem has matured into something unprecedented. Biltmore's 8,000 acres encompass restored forests, agricultural operations, vineyards, historic gardens, wildlife habitats, waterways and reservoirs, research areas. These landscapes are not static scenery. They are working environments shaped by deliberate ecological management. The estate conducts ongoing research into soil health, regenerative agriculture, sustainable livestock practices, water quality, plant pathology, climate adaptation. Thus, Biltmore remains exactly what George intended, a demonstration of how land and knowledge can coexist. Sustainability as a preservation strategy. In the modern era, sustainability is no longer optional for large estates. Rising costs, environmental pressures, and public expectations demand forward-thinking practices. Biltmore uses solar energy support systems, environmentally conscious irrigation methods, composting and organic waste recycling, integrated pest management, habitat restoration programs, sustainable wine production, LEED-certified construction for newer buildings, low-impact tourism infrastructure. These efforts ensure that the estate not only survives, but thrives within contemporary environmental standards. Education and outreach. Expanding Biltmore's purpose. As part of its evolving mission, Biltmore hosts educational programs that reach audiences nationwide. These include student field trips, horticultural workshops, wine education courses, architecture and preservation seminars. historical interpretation programs, forestry, and conservation demonstrations. Through these programs, Biltmore continues to transmit knowledge across generations. It has become not merely a destination, but an educational institution that extends the Vanderbilt legacy of intellectual curiosity, cultural programming, and seasonal traditions. One of Biltmore's strongest modern assets is its cultural programming. The estate shifts with the seasons, inviting visitors to experience its history through changing atmospheres. Spring. Olmsted's gardens explode with color, showcasing thousands of tulips, azaleas, and wisteria. Summer. Outdoor concerts, estate walks, and agricultural exhibits highlight Biltmore's living landscape. Fall. The Blue Ridge Mountains blaze with autumn color, drawing record numbers of visitors. Christmas. The estate transforms into a world of Victorian holiday splendor, continuing traditions George and Edith began in the 1892. These cyclical transformations keep the estate dynamic, relevant, and emotionally resonant. Modern hospitality and the art of experience. Biltmore's hospitality expansion, including the Inn on Biltmore Estate, Village Hotel, and multiple dining venues, has done more than generate revenue. It has restored Biltmore's identity as a place of retreat, reflection, and elevated living. Guests today experience estate-grown foods, mountain sunrises, vineyard views, miles of trails, carriage rides, spa services, curated culinary experiences. These offerings echo the estate's original purpose: to offer beauty, rest, and inspiration in a world that moves too quickly. The estate as an economic engine. Today, Biltmore is one of the most important economic forces in Western North Carolina. It supports thousands of jobs, anchors tourism, and contributes significantly to hospitality, retail, culinary industries, agriculture, transportation, real estate development. This economic role sustains the estate itself. In essence, Biltmore has created a symbiotic relationship with its region. The estate supports the community, and the community supports the estate. This relationship is one of the clearest reasons Biltmore has endured. It is not isolated. It is integrated. The emotional architecture of legacy. Biltmore is not simply preserved, it is felt. Visitors often describe an emotional reaction at the first glimpse of the chateau, the quiet majesty of the library, or the view from the terrace overlooking miles of forest. This emotional connection is Biltmore's greatest asset. People do not return merely to look. They return because the estate gives them a sense of timelessness, a momentary escape, inspiration through beauty, connection to history, appreciation for craftsmanship, a reminder that vision can outlast circumstance. This emotional resonance transforms preservation into purpose, the power of consistency across generations. Through the decades, Biltmore's leadership remained surprisingly consistent in philosophy. Each generation embraced three core values: preserve beauty, honor the past while adapting to the future, operate with integrity, not extravagance. This continuity of vision sustained the estate through periods that destroyed countless others. Biltmore in the 21st century, beyond survival. Today, Biltmore stands not as a survivor of the Gilded Age, but as a redefinition of what legacy can mean. It represents architecture that endures, land that heals, history that teaches, vision that adapts, memory that inspires, family stewardship that protects rather than flaunts wealth. The estate is no longer simply America's largest home. It is a testament to excellence sustained through adversity. Why Biltmore still matters. In an age of digital overload, disposable architecture, and rapid change, Biltmore offers something rare: permanence, craftsmanship, connection, authenticity, aspiration grounded in stewardship. It reminds us that some creations made with intention, humility, and long-term vision can outlast the forces that shape their times. A legacy carried forward. Today, George Vanderbilt's descendants still guide the estate. Their presence ensures that Biltmore remains personal, not institutional. They walk the same grounds George walked, watch over the same mountains he fell in love with, and preserve the home he built with a dream of enduring beauty. What began as one man's intellectual sanctuary became a national treasure. The final secret of Biltmore's survival. If there is one lesson that emerges from Biltmore's 130-year story, it is this: greatness does not survive by accident. It survives through intention. Biltmore endures because every generation refused to surrender. George to the limitations of geography, Edith to the weight of grief and financial strain, Cornelia's sons to the pressures of modernity, William Cecil to the temptations of commercialization, the modern estate to the challenges of preservation. Each generation chose purpose over ease, vision over convenience, legacy over exit. And because of that, Biltmore, the largest privately owned home in American history, still stands, still inspires, still breathes. Not as a relic, not as a museum frozen in time, but as a living dream that refused to die.